everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the impacts of the tourism industry.
Our names are Manal.
I'm Annika.
And I'm Ray. The modern idea of tourism arose in the 17th century with young nobles in Europe traveling across the continent to look at history, art, and cultural heritage. The World Travel and Tourism Council describes modern-day tourism as a social, cultural, and economic phenomenon of the movement of people to other places for business or leisure.
Doctors?
So as for the economic impacts of tourism, according to Johnson, a management studies professor, tourism leakage is the idea that generated income is not available for use within the actual host destination, and that income goes to foreign nations. As a result, the generated income is not being used in the local destinations, and they are losing out on the economic benefit of the money that is being brought in their own yards.
So according to Dr. Stanton, who has a PhD in travel and tourism management, the amount of revenue generated by tourism that leaks out of the host nation can be up to 95%. Phenomena like this can be seen in the Maldives and Caribbean.
Multinational corporations, most of the profit that they generate returns to their home nation, and they also hire foreign workers, and these foreign workers only pay taxes in their country of origin, which is extremely detrimental to the host destination. Goods, services, and labor are also imported from foreign nations because the local populations don't have the skills required to provide hospitality.
Moving into the social impacts. As for the locals, they often face lifestyle changes due to tourism and its construction. So the Union of International Associations found that the construction of businesses can cause two important impacts. The first is the displacement of indigenous people, which is when they have to leave their homes, leave behind their culture, and they have a disconnect from their culture. There's also a disconnect from the traditional sources of work, which means they have to work for the businesses and for the economy of the exact thing that's forcing them to leave their homes.
As for the cultural effects, as countries continue to rely on tourism to generate their economy and stimulate their countries as a whole, they begin to commercialize their culture, and this occurs through mass production of cultural artifacts to be sold as souvenirs, as well as the use of cultural practices as entertainment for tourists. And as countries begin to realize that tourists consider their cultures to be exotic, they start to utilize this to make a profit, and this causes cultural commercialization, which is a process known as staged authenticity, which leads to cultural appropriation, and eventually misinformation gets spread around the world about these cultures and dilutes what they are actually known to be important for.
So land and monuments are also affected by tourism. So mass tourism to historic sites, ancient monuments, historic buildings, and archaeological sites, such as cave paintings, rapidly result in their degradation. And this is mostly due to lots of tourism happening to these countries. And this causes a decline in quality, cleanliness, and authenticity, mostly because tourists neglect to follow rules put in place to protect these historic sites, and exposes them to chemicals and other substances that may cause their deterioration.
So Thomas Weiss, who works for the who's a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research, noticed that in 1830, as early as 1830, people were starting to notice that Niagara Falls was suffering from tourism. And in the 1860s, people said that the tourism had spoiled the falls because of how much the businesses were encroaching on the natural beauty. And in this picture taken about a century later, in 1969, you can see all of the roads and buildings that have destroyed the forest in that area.
So moving on to the environmental impacts.
Tourism leads to environmental pollution, and examples of this are vegetation clearance, habitat loss, and the introduction of pathogens, weeds, and feral animals. In addition, resource exploitation and increased waste leads to increased amounts of pollution due to insufficient waste disposal systems. Pollution is also very common in tourist regions because there are a lot of tourist facilities in these regions, and it's estimated that about 40,000 tourists annually walk on the park paths, and they leave a lot of garbage which isn't cleaned up since it isn't viewed as profitable.
Further, reduction of biodiversity and the destruction of flora and fauna occurs commonly because of many tourist practices. Off-road and maintenance vehicles often crush burrows and different animals. Outdoor tourism involves roads and tracks, which leads to habitat fragmentation, and this causes a loss of genetic diversity, which can be seen through butterflies in Bavaria as well as the caribou in Canada. Further, negligence by tourists, such as vandalism, picking of flora and fauna that are endangered species, and setting up campfires without considering their surroundings are all factors that lead to this genetic diversity loss.
So from 2009 to 2013, the tourism's global carbon footprint increased by 4 times more than expected, leading to about 8% of greenhouse gas emissions, and the number will only grow. Transportation contributes to tourism emissions the most by increasing the consumption of natural resources, which there's already minimal amounts of, and putting pressure on these resources, increasing emissions. A study showed that tourism contributed to 4.4% of global carbon dioxide emissions in 2005, and most of this comes from local transportation.
Now we'll transition to address all of the solutions to our economic problems, starting with economic leakage.
So a solution to economic leakage could be that tourists and host nations can transition from supporting the foreign entities to local entities. They can do this by transitioning from supporting multinational corporations to local corporations. They can stop importing their goods and services from other countries and turn to their local resources. And they can begin to choose exclusive packages rather than all-inclusive packages when picking resorts.
The benefits are that this leads to the employment of locals, it supports local businesses and local economies, and provides tax revenue for the local nations. For example, some of the other benefits are shown when TUI UK Limited, which is a private tourism company that's based in the United Kingdom, they decided to change its policy to only hire local employees. This led to local companies gaining profit because TUI UK Limited had to work with these companies in order to accommodate its interview process. Many local people were trained, and this led to them gaining many skills that are needed to boost employment chances. And this led to an increase in formal education for children, which leads to basically a brighter future for the next generation. The limitations are that MNCs and foreign businesses lose profit, foreign workers lose their jobs, and due to these conflicts that they face, they're likely to oppose the solution. And overall, luxury tourism may decline because luxury tourists are used to foreign luxury goods, which are now being substituted by simple local goods.
As for the cultural or social solution, there are 3 main things that we can solve here. So number 1, to solve the forced lifestyle changes, we can begin to protect land that is important to locals in order to make sure that their homes are not destroyed by tourism construction. As for cultural degradation, we can ban the selling of souvenirs that appropriate local culture. And as for the deterioration of land and monuments, we can increase security at historical and religious sites to make sure that tourists aren't partaking in any activity that can deteriorate the actual sites.
This solution would be the most effective with the help of the local people, most importantly members that are key to cultural populations. If they got involved with government decisions regarding how tourism is handled, we could ensure the locals' best interests are kept in mind.
The benefits of this are that local cultures are not diluted and local lifestyles may remain intact. The problems are that local governments could face economic losses, and stricter laws could lead to a decline in tourism.
So for the environmental solution, we can raise awareness to tourists about sustainable tourism and educate them to stop vandalizing local flora or fauna or stop the importance of picking up after themselves. The government can implement trash cans after frequently walked trails and conduct evaluations prior to constructing anything for the documentation of the species already present, and airlines can use new technologies for more efficient flight paths, use sustainable fuels, and increase fuel and airline efficiency.
There are many pros and cons here. One pro is that the trash cans and education will protect the flora, fauna, and climate from pollution. Additionally, reducing carbon dioxide will reduce climate change in the long run. And lastly, by protecting natural beauty, you can protect tourism and the economy on the whole. On the con side, we have it's time-consuming, costly, and requires a lot of resources to make these changes without much profit.
So we'll move on to our final proposal, and we have decided to incorporate our economic, social, and environmental solutions in order to solve the major issues related to tourism.
The benefit of the solution is it solves all the major issues that are incorporated in tourism, while each individual solution only solves one conflict.
So drawbacks are it's time-consuming, complex. Many individuals who face losses will oppose the situation, and it's costly to introduce.
So there was.
Okay.
And it is important that we're able to solve these issues of tourism because tourism tourism is the fuel of many economies, generates many job opportunities, and overall is the success of many nations. So being able to solve the issues related to tourism can allow us to have a better national and international relations.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to ask each of you folks a question. All right. Aditi, if you had another team member, what other lens or perspective could they have researched that would have made a useful contribution to the project?
So I think if we had another team member, the lens that would be really useful is the scientific lens, mostly because in my environmental lens, I elaborated on the carbon emissions that come from tourism, and if we had a scientific lens, it could really delve deeper into the carbon dioxide emissions and the impact it has on climate change itself and how that's related to tourism, and it could really strengthen it could work with the environmental lens and really strengthen both arguments at once.
Okay. Manav, reflecting on your colleagues' work, which one had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of the problem your group identified?
For me personally, I think that Aditi's report was most contributed most to my evolving of my understanding of this topic, because personally when I began researching this topic, I thought that the most important conflicts that were created by tourism were only the economic conflicts, such as economic leakage. Although I knew that the environmental conflicts did exist, I didn't think that they were that important. That they were that important. After hearing Aditi's report, I really thought that environmental lens suffers a lot of different conflicts due to tourism, such as carbon dioxide emissions, pollution, which decreases the nation's beauty, and that leads to decline in tourism. I thought that this was really important because if it decreases tourism, that's counterproductive, because our major goal in this overall solution presentation was to promote sustainable tourism. But if we get rid of tourism due to ruining the nation's natural beauty, it's not very productive.
Okay. Annika, how did the group decide to include Aditi's perspective lens conclusion into the overall presentation?
So Aditi talked about the environmental lens, and this was really eye-opening, I think, for a lot of us, because we didn't realize how much tourism affected the environments of many tourist attractions. So she talked a lot about carbon dioxide emissions and local flora and fauna, and we were able to incorporate this into our solutions because we solved the problem through more efficiency in both airlines and through hotels, and we were able also to incorporate this with an economic solution as well, because we realized that all our lenses were interconnected in many ways.
Okay. And Ray, who in your group did you find to be the most contradictory to your personal opinion, and why?
I probably found Annika's lens to be the most contradictory to mine, because I looked at my research through a historical lens, while she used a cultural or social lens. And so when I first was reading, I was seeing a lot of things that were already in the past, issues that had already been at least partially solved. And so in my mind, I didn't know the full impacts of tourism today. But after seeing a lot of her research and seeing how, like, for example, in my additional research, seeing Niagara Falls and how that had been degraded, I realized that a lot of these issues are ongoing, and that they hurt the cultures, the beautiful cultures that were once a part of early tourism with those young nobles in Europe, were being destroyed thanks to tourism now.
Okay. Thank you very much.